In this video, I'm going to discuss the deadliest plagues in human history. The list is in order of how many people each plague killed, because, well, that's what makes them deadly. The list starts somewhat tame, but towards the end, let's just say I think you'll be washing your hands more often. 1. The Great Plague of London. So this plague was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which unfortunately for the people of London in 1665 had a real flair for the dramatic. Thanks to rats and fleas living their best lives, the people of London did the exact opposite. Picture this, you're chilling in London, and bam, 1/4 of the city's population, about 100,000 people, is wiped out. The symptoms were stuff of nightmares, fevers, pain, and these swellings called buboes. Now, the response to this mess was, well, let's just say they tried. Houses with sick people got the medieval version of a quarantine sticker, which was literally just a red X pointed on the doors of those who were infected, which works, I guess. Plague doctors roamed the streets looking like they were trick-or-treating, with their beaked masks stuffed with herbs. Why? Well, they thought the bad smells of London was what was causing the plague. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. Evidently. The social scene in London also took a nosedive. People were either dropping dead like flies or hightailing it out of there. Even big names like Samuel Pepys and Isaac Newton were like, nope, I'm out. And I don't really blame them. Newton even worked in isolation. Talk about social distancing before it was cool. And then, as if the plague wasn't enough, 1666 brought the Great Fire of London. This citywide barbecue did a number on London, but it did also catch the plague lacking, roasting a bunch of rats and fleas. That actually helped to end the plague. So, there you have it. The Great Plague of London. A story of rats, fleas, and a city that just couldn't catch a break. Number 2. The Hong Kong Flu. So the Hong Kong Flu was like the third act in the 20th century trilogy of influenza pandemics, following the notorious Spanish flu of 1918 and the Asian flu of 1957, both of which are featured later in this video. This little viral superstar emerged in Hong Kong in July 1968, and boy did it have ambitions. It quickly spread across the globe, trolling anybody in sight. Symptoms-wise, you can expect fever, chills, muscle aches, and death. Sometimes. Let's talk numbers. The virus was no slouch. It infected a whopping 15 to 20% of the global population and sent about 1 million people to heaven. Or maybe hell. In the US alone, 100,000 people lost the battle, with that number being mainly those over 65. The response to the flu was a mixed bag. Vaccines sorta saved us, but they showed up a bit late. Unfortunately. By the time people rolled up their sleeves, the virus had already been around the globe, at least twice. And social distancing, yeah, no, we didn't do that back then. But hey, every cloud has a silver lining. The Hong Kong flu was a wake-up call, highlighting the need for rapid vaccine rollouts and international teamwork in the face of pandemics. Even though it did sort of kill 1 million people, but at least we sort of learned a lesson, maybe? Probably not. 3. The Russian flu. So, where do you think this came from? If you thought Russia, you're an idiot. No, well, the thing is we don't actually know where it came from, despite the name. Possibly Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, maybe. Somewhere near there at least. But even though we don't know exactly where it originated, we do know it didn't stick around, hitting Europe and North America very quickly. For the symptoms, fever, fatigue, and coughing up a lung, and death. That last one is a common trend on this list for obvious reasons. As the Russian flu mutated, it began affecting the brain more and more, and people began to get symptoms like insomnia and depression. That's not your everyday flu. That's like if flu went to college and majored in neuroscience. Here's the kicker. Back in the late 1800s, they were just getting the hang of this whole virus thing. No vaccines, no antivirals, just chicken soup and stay away from me, I guess. So all round, in the grand scheme of plagues, the Russian flu was a kind of lightweight when it came to mortality rates. We're talking about roughly 1 million people dying worldwide, which, don't get me wrong, is a lot, but compared to some of the others on this list, it is not much, really. 4. The Third Cholera Pandemic. The Third Cholera Pandemic was not just your average tummy bug. It was a full-blown, devastating outbreak that rampaged across the globe from 1852 to 1860. Originating from the Ganges Delta in India, known as Vibrio cholera, had a nasty way of causing diarrhea and dehydration. Untreated, it was like a one-way ticket to the afterlife. life. What made this pandemic one of history's headline acts was the global scale of its destruction, thanks to the booming travel and trade of the era, plus a dash of colonial traffic and troop movement. Cholera became an unwelcome globe-trotter, hitting Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, and even North America. The cities were worst hit. Why? Well, think about it. Back then, city planning was more about fitting as many people in as possible than ensuring clean water, and cholera spreads through water, so yeah, it didn't end well. Now here's where it gets interesting. This pandemic was a brutal wake-up call in understanding how diseases spread. Take Jon Snow. No, not the Game of Thrones guy, but a real-life hero in London. He figured out that the water pump was spreading cholera and famously yanked off its handle, effectively stopping the outbreak. Snow's work was a game-changer. It laid the foundations for study of diseases and highlighting the need for good sanitation. This led to cleaner water supplies and sewers. So while cholera wreaked havoc, it also paved the way for modern public health practices. In Russia, the impact was especially severe, with about 1 million deaths. The global response to the cholera nightmare was a mixed bag. Some places jumped on the public health bandwagon, implementing measures based on the newfound understanding of the disease. Others, however, were still trying to catch up, lacking in the resources or knowledge to fight back. Number 5. The Asian flu. One of humanity's greatest hits, or rather misses, the Asian flu pandemic of 1957 to 1958. Imagine one moment you're jamming to Elvis Presley, and the next you're down with a fever, and well, ending up in a coffin. This wasn't your average flu. Obviously, it was like a flu had hit puberty, awkward, unpredictable, and a total nuisance. Caused by a subtype of the influenza virus, it had mixed variations of flu genes. Putting it simply, Mother Nature basically decided to create a toxic gene cocktail, and let's just say, the result was pretty potent. Like very potent. First spotted in East Asia in early 1957, the virus was like the latest gossip. It spread fast. Typical symptoms included fever, cough, and feeling like you've been hit by a bus. But wait, it gets better. Or worse, really. The pandemic came in 2 waves, the second being a more action-packed than the first. This was probably the first time the sequel was, well, better than the original, even though it wasn't better because people died. The elderly and pregnant women got it worse, but humanity wasn't going to take this lying down. Except the people who had the virus. Scientists in a race against time absolutely cooked, whipping up a vaccine. It was one of the first times the world really pulled together and punched a virus in the face. So a round of applause for nerds, I suppose. However, like any good drama, there were challenges. Limited vaccine supply and logistical headaches. The impact? Big. We're talking about a third of the world's population catching this flu, leading to about 2 million deaths. In the US alone, about 70,000 people kicked the bucket. Healthcare systems were gasping for air. Literally. And the economy wasn't doing well either. But hey, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Compared to the 1918 Spanish flu, which comes later on this list, this was a walk in a park. If that park was the beaches of Normandy. 6. The Antonine Plague. So for this one, we have to go back to roughly 165 to maybe 180 AD, you know, only 2,000 years ago, roughly. Picture this, the Roman Empire at its peak, and suddenly, wham, the Antonine Plague hits. The plague was fashionably known as the Plague of Galen, after a big shot physician who described it. The plague was probably the biggest disaster in the ancient world. Historians still don't know whether it was smallpox or measles, but let's be real, when you're covered in spots and feel like death warmed up, it doesn't really matter. So, where did this thing come from? Well, it said China or Central Asia. It seems some of the Roman soldiers, while out flexing in the east, picked up a nasty bug and brought it home. Talk about instant karma. The symptoms were stuff of nightmares. Fevers, sore throats, the runs, and for some unlucky folks, skin eruptions. And this was before they had moisturizer, so that's a shame. And yeah, one more symptom is death as well. But that's a given. Here's where it gets heavy. This plague didn't just pick on the poor or the slaves. It didn't discriminate. From your average guy to the fanciest people in the empire, everybody was in the line of fire. The death toll was brutal, with an estimated 10 million people, well, dying. We're talking about a good 10% of the population here. The Roman Empire, decimated. Border defenses compromised. This virus was doing more damage than any of Rome's enemies could have ever dreamed. Economically, it was a disaster. Labor shortages hit agriculture and trade like a ton of bricks. Imagine trying to run your empire when a chunk of your workforce just dies. Unfortunately, society was left reeling and the economy took a nosedive from this, which it would take ages to recover from. But wait, there's more. People were so freaked out by the mass dying, they turned to superstitions and religious cults that there was no tomorrow. It was a spiritual free-for-all. Some historians even think this helped Christianity spread its wings. It offered hope and a community in the world that was pretty much a hot mess. Medical responses. Well, let's just say Roman medicine was more about guesswork and try this herb, it might work, than an actual science. Treatments were a mixed bag of dietary restrictions, bloodletting, because why not, I guess, and herbal remedies that probably didn't do much beyond giving people something to do. In the grand scheme of human history, this plague was definitely a dark and grim patch. It showed us how a tiny virus can bring a superpower to its knees, reshaping economies, societies, and cultures in ways nobody could have ever predicted. 7. The 2020 virus. YouTube doesn't like people talking about the actual name of this plague or virus, so I'm just going to rename it to the 2020 virus for the rest of the video. I think we all know what it actually is. So the 2020 virus is one I'm sure we're all well acquainted with, unless you're under the age of, I don't know, like 10. Which if you are, probably get off this channel and maybe watch SpongeBob or something, I don't know. Or you're just a massive idiot. But I'm going to assume you know. So the 2020 virus was born and raised in China, and it didn't stay put for long. Nope. It decided to see the world. It topped on planes, trains, and automobiles. And before we knew it, bam, it's a pandemic. Declared by who? The World Health Organization on March 11th, 2020. Now, the 2020 virus wasn't just your average flu. It's like the flu went to the gym and bulked up and came back with vengeance. People were losing their sense of taste and smell, getting knocked out with fatigue, and some even landed in hospital with severe pneumonia. The virus was especially harsh on the elderly and those with pre-existing health conditions. And how did it spread? Through the air. Every cough, sneeze, or even hearty chat could launch these tiny virus missiles into the air. The sneaky part, even people who didn't feel sick were spreading it. The world hit the pause button, economics crashed, people were cooped up at home, and face masks became the new normal. It was like living in a sci-fi movie, but without the cool special effects. But hey, it wasn't all doom and gloom. As you know, you were there. Vaccines were developed at lightning speed, a real testament to how far humans have come. In a nutshell, the 2020 virus was a crash course for the entire world. It changed the way we work, learn, and even socialize. 8. The Cocoliztli Epidemic. Back in the mid-1500s, in what's now Mexico, there was an absolutely brutal disease outbreak called the Cocoliztli Epidemic. Cocoliztli, by the way, was a word used by the Aztecs to describe a plague. This wasn't just any old flu season. It was a full-blown catastrophic event. We're talking about one of the deadliest health crises in the whole continent of America, being especially brutal for the indigenous folk. The mystery of what caused the epidemic is something out of a detective novel. For ages, nobody knew what it was. Some modern science nerds think it might have been some sort of viral fever, kind of like Ebola. Others think it was a nasty bacterial infection. The impact? Devastating. The plague hit just a few decades after the Europeans showed up, bringing with them suitcases full of diseases like smallpox. The indigenous people had zero immunity to these germs, so they were already in a tough spot. Then this plague came along and just bulldozed through the entire population. We're talking 50 million people wiped out, which was a huge chunk of the population back then. The symptoms were straight out of a horror movie. High fever, severe headaches, maybe black tongue, dark urine. Oh, and let's not forget about the large swelling behind the ears, spreading to the neck and face, plus some very serious neurological disorders. This thing was fast and fierce, scaring the living daylights out of everyone. The epidemic wasn't just a health crisis, it shook the very foundation of society. Major societies like the Aztecs and the Mixtecs crumbled. Agriculture tanked, leading to famine. Social structure kaput. It was a domino effect of disaster. And here's the kicker. The epidemic was like an unintentional ally to the Spanish, with the indigenous population knocked off their feet by the disease. This led to the Spanish facing less resistance. 9. The HIV pandemic. So picture this, the early 80s, a time of big hair, even bigger music, and unfortunately the beginning of one of the most significant public health challenges ever, the HIV pandemic. This sneaky little virus, known as HIV, waltzed into the scene and targets the body's immune system. Here's where it gets a bit darker. The early years of the pandemic were like a horror movie. There was fear, stigma, and a whole bunch of misunderstanding. People were particularly pointing fingers at certain groups like gay men and drug users, which, let's be honest, wasn't really helping anyone. Plus, the lack of effective treatments meant this virus was a one-way ticket to death. The impact? Massive. We're talking millions of lives lost, healthcare systems were swamped, communities devastated, and it was a social and economic nightmare. But there was light at the end of the tunnel. Medical science comes to the rescue. The development of a kind of treatment called ART made HIV significantly more manageable, allowing people to live longer and healthier lives, even if they did have the virus. So, the world kind of got its act together with this one, even if the pandemic did kill 36 million people. 10. The Justinian Plague. This bad boy hit the scene between 541 and 542 AD, and decided to shake things up a bit. Emperor Justinian I, the big cheese of the Byzantine Empire at the time, got the plague named after him. Something I can't imagine that he would have liked. Picture this, you're chilling in the Byzantine Empire, which is now Istanbul, and then this plague hits, and it's like nothing you've ever seen before. The culprit? A little bacteria called Yersinia pestis. Yes, the same one from the plague of London. So this guy's a repeat offender in the world of plagues. Now imagine you're living in those times. You wake up feeling off, and before you know it, you're dealing with a fever, weakness, and these painful swollen lymph nodes called buboes. The thing spread fast, like really fast, and the death toll was off the charts. We're talking up to 5,000 people dropping like flies every single day. The plague might have wiped out 50 million people, but to put that into perspective, that's about half of the Eastern Roman Empire's population at the time. Yikes. The Justinian Plague was like a wrecking ball for the time. Labour shortage? Check. Agriculture and trade disruption? Check. Military in shambles? Double check. This was a major oeuvre moment for the Empire's ability to defend its borders and manage its territories. But wait, there's more. The cultural and religious impact was huge. People were losing their minds, thinking it was the end of the world. This led to a spike in religious cults and the birth of new religious movements. As for dealing with the plague, let's just say they weren't exactly nailing it. Medical knowledge back then was pretty basic, so their responses were a combo of traditional remedies, prayers, and probably a lot of ROs. 11. The Spanish flu. This beast of a bug swept across continents faster than you subscribing to this channel. It's like the virus was on a world tour, infecting about a third of the global population. The death toll? A mind-blowing 100 million peeps. That's like wiping out an entire population of a country, or maybe even two. But here's where it gets even wilder. This flu wasn't just any old sniffle fest. It was a young adult seeking missile. Usually the flu likes to aim for the elderly, but the Spanish flu, it oddly went for the younger people, or otherwise healthy adults. Picture this, a world where young adults are most at risk, flipping the typical flu script on its head. The symptoms? Oh, they're about as delightful as a mix of fever, nausea, often with a grand finale of pneumonia and death. It's like going from I'm feeling a bit off to I might not see tomorrow in record time. And let's talk timing. World War I. You've got troops moving around like pieces on a chessboard and crowded military camps. Perfect for Mr. Flu to party. Plus the world's becoming a smaller place thanks to more travel and the virus hitch free rides to new exotic lands. The response to the uninvited guest was a well-mixed bag from quarantine to good old personal hygiene, and the world was throwing everything but the kitchen sink at it. But spoiler alert, there was no superhero vaccine coming to save the day. The aftermath? Picture this, industry and farms taking a sick leave in the masses. The economic and social impacts was like having a bad hangover that just wouldn't quit. So, the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1919 was not just a pandemic, but a catalyst for reshaping our world. Now we're on to the most deadly plague ever. A plague that was so devastating, it was literally called the Black Death. 12. The Black Death. The Black Death, a nightmare that hit the world from 1347 to 1351. This wasn't your average flu. Quite obviously, we're talking about a killer bacteria called, yes, you guessed it, Yersinia pestis. The same bad guy behind the Justinian Plague and the Great Plague of London. And let me tell you, the symptoms were a triple treat, which involved buboes, pneumonia, and septicemic forms. This plague went all around the world, starting in Asia, hitching rides along trade routes to Crimea, and then party crashing its way through Europe. It had some unlikely accomplices: rats and their fleas. These fleas were like tiny vampires, feeding on infected rats and then giving them to humans, and then giving humans a taste of the plague. The toll, catastrophic, doesn't even start to cover it. We're talking about wiping out 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Imagine that, up to 200 million people gone. Europe must have felt like a ghost town. With so many people kicking the bucket, there were major labour shortages. This shook up social and economic structures, and guess what? Peasants suddenly had bargaining power. It's like the job market got flipped on its head. Culture and religion weren't spared either. The Black Death had people questioning everything. Life, death, suffering. It was a huge crisis on a massive scale. Public health response, well, let's just say they were winging it. Quarantine started to pop up, especially in Italian city-states. These guys were laying down groundworks for handling epidemics, even if they didn't quite know what they were dealing with. It did a 180. Less population meant more goods to go around. Prices dropped, and their economic power shifted from lords to the regular peasant. In a nutshell, the Black Death wasn't just a tragic episode. It reshaped Europe's path, socially, economically, culturally, and religiously. Plus, it's a stark reminder of just how devastating infectious diseases can be. Trust me, this one's a chapter in history you can't ignore. So that's the most deadly plagues of all time. I guess we can only hope we don't have any more. If you thought this video was good, drop a sub, but only if you actually thought it was good. Think about it.